This video is the Getting Started video for Easy Composites version 2. And before I get started into creating the composites, I first want to discuss the order which I suggest to learn things, because a lot of people I know are going to want to jump straight into batch processing and creating template layouts. Now, if you start in on this without learning the basics, you're going to be confused and it's going to seem a little overwhelming. There's quite a bit to this program. It's not super difficult, but you really need to start with the basics and learn to walk before you learn to run. So I suggest going in the order I have listed here. The first thing we'll be doing in this video is setting up the Photoshop scratch disk. There is a right way and a wrong way to do that, and this is super important for this program because Photoshop will use a lot of scratch disk with this program. After that, you want to start building composites using pre-made templates without batch processing, just so you can learn how the process of building composites works and how it puts things into the template without overwhelming yourself on the template creation process, because the template creation process is a little bit complex. But if you use pre-made templates, the program is actually very simple to run. And then, as far as importing the text data for the student names, you'll first want to learn how to do that with file names without a data file, which I'll show you in this video. I'm going to cover these first 3 items. But I suggest not even going into data file creations until you've started building some templates, or not building some, until you started building some composites and learning how that process works. Once you've figured that part out, then we'll get in the next following videos to editing the graphics file in a pre-made template, because that's an easy way to customize a template without too much work, to make it your own unique style. Then after that, running memory mates using pre-made templates without batch processing to learn how the memory mate process works. Then after all of these things, then and only then start getting into creating data files and using those without batch processing, just one composite at a time. Once you've figured out how to use the data files, then the videos after that will take you into batch processing and creating the template layouts. So I suggest sticking with that order, because that is going to really help you out if you just stay in a good learning order there. So the first thing is, I'm going to show you how to set up the Photoshop scratch disk. This is super, super important. So under Edit and Preferences, I think under Mac as File and Preferences, you'll go into the scratch disks. So I've already got mine set up, but by default, it's going to be set up with your system drive, and that's going to be on top. And what a lot of people do when they add a new scratch disk is they'll just simply check the scratch disk they want. But the problem with that is Photoshop will then use your system disk. It will use whichever one's on top first, and it's going to fill up your entire system disk before it goes into the next disk. And if you're doing a lot of batching, it will fill up your system disk. It's not a question of can it fill up your system disk, it's will it fill up your system disk, and eventually yes it will. And even though there's other disk available for it to use, once your system disk gets full, your whole computer is going to start running slow, because programs need available space on the system disk, and Photoshop just does not manage this very well. I've got an example here in the scratch disk I'm using. You can see there's these 16 gigabyte files, and Photoshop will start just adding these temporary files, but it will never delete these until you've restarted Photoshop. And it's going to just keep adding those files until the disk is full. So what you want to do is uncheck the system disk. Don't even use that at all. And you can reorder, but if you've unchecked the disk, it really doesn't matter. So in this case, I'm using my D drive, which is an external SSD. This is only a 1/2 terabyte. I'm just using this for my purposes, but I'm not doing the amount of batching that you'll do. And I recommend getting at least a 1 terabyte drive, preferably 2 terabytes or more. I know that sounds like a lot, but believe me, Photoshop will use that if you are doing a lot of batch processing. These are relatively inexpensive. Like here's a 1 terabyte for $100. It does not have to be a fast drive. I've done testing in the task manager. So what happens is Photoshop's going to use, like in this case, we're already using 32 gigabytes of RAM because I ran some batching before this just to get this to start using some scratch disks so I could show you in this demonstration. But I've done testing where I've actually looked at the how much data it's writing to the disk. And although it's creating these 16 gigabyte files, it's not actually writing very much data. The transfer rate's like in the kilobytes. So I don't know what Photoshop is doing. I think it's just claiming space to use for a rainy day. I really don't know. But I do know that it will never erase these files even after the files are closed. So you see we've got no files open, but Photoshop is still using 32 gigabytes of RAM, and it's still got these 16 gigabyte files here. So just get yourself a 1 or 2 terabyte SSD. Doesn't have to be super fast. Just any $100 1 TB SSD is fine. And then map that to your scratch disk. What will happen if you don't do that, you'll eventually either get a scratch disk error or you'll get any various error, because it might not even give a scratch disk error. It might just give an error when it runs out of disk space for whatever operation it's trying to perform. Okay, with that out of the way, the first thing you're going to want to do before you build a composite is to download one of the template files. I've got a couple of free ones on the website here. So the standard class template and the vertical grid, these are free templates. You can download either of those. But I suggest just starting out with the basic standard class template. Download that. Now, the templates here are different than what you're used to. Like if you're working with sports photo automation, you're used to a template being one PSD file. With Easy Composites, it's not like that. So for all mine that I released, they're under a folder called Template Files. And you'll see there's multiple files. And I discussed this in a lot more detail in the template specific videos, but just a brief explanation. You've got different layout files, which if we open one of these, it's just a layout that's got 5 smart objects on it. And then we've got a graphics file. When you build a composite, it's going to merge these 2 PSDs into one PSD and build the composite into that. The reason why I did that was because if you want to change the graphics, you don't want to have to change it for every single one of these files. It needs these different files so it knows how to make the layouts based on the number of images you have. But for making an edit to the graphics file, that way you only have to do that in one place, and it's going to use that same graphics file regardless of which one it picks. So it's always going to pick the file that has the least amount of extras. So in this first example, I'm going to run a batch that has 24 images, and this easy comp hyphen and then the number is the how it's going to know how many image slots there are in each of these files. So for running 24 images, you see there's one for 20, one for 22, and one for 25. There isn't one for 23 or 24, so it's going to grab this one for 25. And you don't need one for every single number of images. So I'll explain this after I build it. So the first thing I'm going to do is just go into this Build Composites, select the template folder, and if you've downloaded the template from the website, you'll get this folder here, but make sure when you hit Select Template Folder, you're selecting the folder called Template Files, you're selecting the folder that has the files underneath it. You're not going to see any files because this is a folder select window. So you just hit select folder and we can see it says template files. Now I'm going to select the folder that has the images. And for data mode, by default, it will open with a CSV or text file. In the drop-down, I suggest learning how to use the data mode by file names first. I'm going to select file names for this one, but it's not actually going to import the student names because the naming for the files is not correct in here. I'm doing that purposely so you can see what happens in that case. And by default, this recenter bottom row is checked. In any of the templates that I release on the website, you can leave that checked. They'll all work with that. There are situations where you want to uncheck that for some of your own custom designs, but for anything I release, for the most part, you can just leave this checked. I'm just going to hit Build Composite. All right, that finished in 31 seconds here. So the first thing I'm going to point out here is that you don't see the names underneath the images. And we chose data mode file names, but in the case where your file names are not set up properly to import that name data, what it will do is just hide the layers. So for example, the layers are still there, but we've still got this text layer, but it's just the placeholder text right here because these file names were not set up properly, which I will show you to do in a couple minutes here. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Okay, the next thing is if you remember, it pulled in that template that had 25 image slots, but what it's done is it's erased that last slot and recentered the bottom row. If we did not have this checked, this row would be aligned just as it was when it imported the template, so we'd have that empty slot on the right. But since we had recenter bottom row, this, in the case where it has to delete slots, will recenter. So it's going to fill up the amount of slots. Let's open that template file here. So it has opened up this template file. It filled 24 slots. It deleted slot 25 and then recentered this row. And if we look at our template folder here, let's say we had 23 images. Again, there's a 22 and a 25. If we had 23, it would have still opened up this 25. And it would have deleted another slot. So let's say we only had 23 images in here. The final layout would have looked like this. Okay, so I'll discuss all of that in quite a bit more detail when I do the videos that really dive into the templates. So make sure to watch all the videos in this series because I don't want this video to run on too long. But the next thing to discuss is I guess I won't talk about editing the graphics yet. I'm going to get one that imports the names first, and then we'll discuss the header text here. So in order to use this data mode file names here, we need to go into the one we just ran was this one. So it has the last name hyphen first name. Well, that didn't work because that's not the proper naming. What you must do for it to be able to import the names, and I've got a folder set up with these file names here, is you have to use an underscore. So it's last name underscore first name. You can also have an additional underscore if you want, or multiple additional underscores if you want. Okay, so you could have For instance, Adams underscore Malachi underscore some more stuff behind that. When it looks at the file names, it's going to separate those by underscore, and it knows the first part is the last name, the second part is the first name, and anything after the underscore that's behind the first name, it's going to ignore anything else. Additionally, if you want to force something into the first slot, and you can do more than the first slot, but you can put a number in the front of the last name. So for example, the teacher here, it's 1 Reynolds. Now it wouldn't matter in this case if it was 2 Reynolds, because it's not actually forcing that into a specific slot. So for example, if we wanted to put something in this slot right here, we couldn't just put the number 6 and force something into the 6th slot. The only thing this does is it changes the sorting of those file names. So the program is going to do a basic alphanumeric sort, and since the last name is before the first name, it's going to naturally sort by last name and then by first name. But if we put a number in front of the name, it'll put that in the front of the sorting order alphanumerically. I hope that makes sense. So it's going to put the teacher first because we've got this number here. I'll leave that at 2 just to demonstrate that that'll actually put it in slot 1, but it's just going to affect the sorting of that. It's also going to, when it replaces the text in the template, in the text layer, it's going to erase the number that's ahead of it. And you can add up to 3 digits, just don't make it 4. So if you're forcing things into more than 9 slots, you'll have to put 1 decimal in front of it, or 1 digit in front of it, 1 leading 0. So if if you have a template that's got 35 images and you want to specify exact spots for all 35, you can do that, but you'll need to put this 0 in front because it's an alphanumeric sort. So I'm not going to get too much into that. It'll need it. And if you're doing over 100, you would need 0, 0, 1. If you are, like I say, trying to force all of the images. But if you're just going to force one into slot 1, you could put that as number 1. Like I say, I'll put that to number 2 just so I can demonstrate that that'll still force it in slot 1 just for the purposes of demonstration here. All right, enough talking about that. Let's just rerun this here. And so now I'm going to select my other folder of images here that's got the correct file names. All right, you can see that it's now imported the file name data and it's entered the names correctly. And you can see the teacher is in the first slot because it got sorted because of that number in front. And just again, it's even though that was number 2, it still put it in slot 1 because the only thing we did was affect the sorting order. That's not telling it slot 2. That's just causing the sorting order to put that as the first. So pretty simple there. Okay, the next thing is if you're just building one composite at a time, you can still use a data file to import all of the other text data for your graphics file. However, setting that up might be more time than it's worth because it's probably just as easy to go in and edit that after it's built the composite. So with the data file, that's more of like a batch processing thing. But in any case, once it's imported the template, you're still going to have your text items in there. So then you would just go in and fill in all the text items and then save this off as a JPEG or whatever. Like I say, This can be automated through the data file, but I'll get to that in a few videos where we're actually discussing the data file automation. I think that covers everything I want to discuss for this video. Do make sure you watch the following videos and just don't start trying to use everything in this plugin without watching the videos, because there's a lot to this.